Kale had no idea what drew him to those ruins, but something deep down in his soul was telling him to keep going. The broken stones beneath his feet seemed to whisper ancient secrets, like the civilizations that had once lived there were still watching him. He, just a simple orphan mercenary, could never have imagined that a simple mission to find hidden treasures would lead him to something way bigger. When he touched the stones covered in runes, a chill ran down his spine. It was like something in his blood had awakened, and the silence of the night was broken by a distant echo, a whisper from a forgotten past. The Guardians of the Void had watched in silence, hidden in the shadows until that moment. When Kale got closer to the black mask, covered in runes no man had ever been able to decipher, they revealed themselves. Their hooded figures emerged from the darkness with hollow, deep stares. They weren't just warriors, they were the protectors of something way older. When Kale grabbed the mask, the Guardians called him the Last One. Those words echoed in his mind like a sentence, but he didn't get why. Confused and scared, Kale could feel the weight of something much bigger getting closer. As he ran through the dunes of the Forbidden Desert, the Guardians always seemed to be one step behind. Kale felt like his very existence was tied to something he couldn't understand. He started having dreams. Vivid nightmares, where he saw colossal battles and felt the power of magic weapons in his hands. But when he woke up, he wasn't sure if what he saw was a memory from a forgotten past or something that was still to come. Each night brought a new vision, and the presence of the Guardians seemed to grow stronger, like Kale's fate was a huge web, just waiting to be unraveled. Lorien, his archer companion, tried to calm Kale down, but he knew something inside him was changing. The power in his blood, in his veins, felt like a fire he didn't know how to control. Looking at the black mask, Kale felt a stronger connection. It was like it was calling to him, telling him he was part of something much bigger, a story that had been unfolding for millennia. But what he didn't know was that by touching that artifact, he had unleashed something very dangerous. An ancient power that had been sealed, hidden in the shadows of the past, and now, it was about to be uncovered. "Why you, Kale?" asked Damaris, the wandering mage, in a worried whisper. "Why are you the only one hearing the call of the ruins?" Kale didn't have an answer. The Guardian's words still echoed in his head, and he couldn't figure out how he fit into that puzzle. He didn't know what it meant to be the last one, but the feeling of being watched unsettled him. With every step he took, more questions popped up. What had he triggered by grabbing the mask? Why did the runes react to him, and why did he feel like he was the only one who could interact with the ancient remnants? As the night fell over the desert, the feeling of being followed grew stronger. The stars in the sky seemed to be watching him, and the shadows of the dunes stretched out like the land itself was alive. Kale felt the weight of responsibility closing in. He didn't know what the future held, but he felt like he couldn't run from it anymore. Whatever he was, the answers were hidden somewhere, and he was determined to find them, even if he had to face those who wanted him to fall. During a moment of rest, Kale was hit with a sudden warmth in his chest. He looked at the mask, and the runes started glowing in a dark red hue. What was happening to him? It was like the artifact was reacting to his heart, like it was syncing with him in a way he couldn't understand. That's when he had a flash, a sudden vision. He saw images of ancient warriors, of battles, and something that made him break into a cold sweat. A dark figure, an ancient shadow watching him. He knew he was in danger, but something bigger was at stake. Kale closed his eyes and took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside him. He didn't know what the mask meant, or what the Guardians wanted from him. But he knew he couldn't turn back now. Something much bigger was at play, and he needed to uncover the truth. What did the Guardians of the Void want with him? What was he really? He wasn't just a mercenary, and this fate seemed to have been mapped out for him the moment he was born. The past was calling him, and he couldn't ignore it anymore. The next day, Kale set out for Zarak, the city of lost scholars. He knew he'd find answers there, but he also knew that with every answer, the weight of his destiny would grow heavier. He felt the air get thicker as he got closer to the city, and the shadows seemed to stretch out more than usual. Whatever he found in Zarak could change everything, but one thing was certain. His life would never be the same. The Guardians, the ancient symbols, the mask. It all tied together into something bigger, something Kale still couldn't fully understand. But he knew he was about to find out what was really going on. The echo of forgotten civilizations called him, and he could no longer ignore it. The question was, how far was he willing to go to uncover the truth? Kale never imagined that what started as a simple rescue mission would turn into something this grand. When he first stepped into Zarak, the city of scholars, he felt like a fish out of water. The streets were filled with ancient pillars and statues that it felt like they were watching every move. His footsteps were heavy in the dust that covered the ground, as if the very air carried the echoes of a forgotten time. There, he was searching for answers about the mystery of the Black Mask and his encounters with the Guardians of the Void. But what he didn't know was that Zarak was hiding a secret far older than he could ever imagine. The scholars in the city spoke with excitement about the dynasty of the Lost Shadows, a forgotten lineage that, according to reports, had power so immense it threatened to unbalance the world itself. Cale got chills when he found fragments of a book that mentioned this dynasty. The words were all jumbled, but one in particular made his heart race: the last. How could he, a simple mercenary, be so connected to something so ancient? Why did his name echo in these records? He had no answers, but he felt something inside him waking up, something he didn't fully understand. In one of the city's hallways, Cale, Lorien, and Damaris met an old scholar, a man hunched over from the weight of his years and the wisdom he'd accumulated. He explained to them that the dynasty of the Lost Shadows was made up of warriors who, in ancient times, had been chosen to protect humanity from forces beyond comprehension. But over time, those forces grew so powerful that the dynasty itself was considered a threat. And so, the names of the heroes and the deeds of their battles were erased, as if they had never existed. But something still remained. Something that couldn't be destroyed. Then the ground shook. Zarak was attacked by colossal creatures wrapped in living darkness, as if the night itself had materialized to devour everything in its path. The streets became a battlefield, with the citizens running in panic, trying to escape what seemed like the end of everything. Without thinking twice, Cale drew his sword and ran to face what was coming. But as he fought, an unknown power awakened inside him. His eyes glowed, and the air around him seemed to pulse with ancient energy. When he touched the Black Mask, a scream echoed through the air, and suddenly, the shadows around him became living blades, cutting through the enemies with terrifying precision. Lorien and Damaris were stunned, unable to understand what had just happened. The dark blades danced around Cale, guided by his will, as if he were an extension of the very power of darkness. But what did that mean? Was it a gift? Or was it a curse? They didn't know, but they knew the world around them was crumbling, and Cale was their only hope for resistance. But in that moment, Cale also wondered, had he awakened this power, or had the power awakened him? The shadows inside him were deep and vast, and he felt there was something bigger at play. Something he couldn't ignore any longer. With the monsters defeated, the city looked like a field of destruction, but Cale knew that was just the beginning. He needed to find answers. But when he looked at the Black Mask, he felt a sense that something beyond his control was pulling him in. It was like his life was part of something bigger, something he couldn't escape. He had to understand what was happening. He needed to know why he, and only he, was able to touch the mask and unleash the power within it. The Guardians of the Void, those mysterious warriors who had attacked him, were still somewhere out there, and Cale knew the only way to survive was to understand what they knew. They called him the Last. But what did that really mean? Why was he the chosen one? Why did the mask react to him? He felt that he wasn't the only one being tested. Something bigger was moving, and he was right in the middle of it. But would he be able to handle what was coming? Or, in the end, was he destined to fall to the dark legacy awakening inside him? The truth Cale had just uncovered felt like an overwhelming weight on his chest. His mind couldn't process the magnitude of it. The Ghost Emperors. Immortal beings who had ruled before even the great known civilizations existed. Beings who had sustained their power by draining the life from innocent souls, leaving a trail of destruction and pain wherever they went. And now, Cale was right in the middle of all of it. The Guardians of the Void, shadowy figures that seemed to come from places where time had unraveled, spoke of him as if he were the key to something much greater. The Last. Those words echoed in his mind like a distant, impenetrable echo, something he couldn't fully comprehend. The Guardian who had confronted him in the ruins had told him in a grave tone that Cale's fate was already sealed. He was the last heir of the Lost Shadows lineage, the lineage that, for centuries, had been responsible for imprisoning the Ghost Emperors. Now, he would be forced to face the horrors that his ancestors had locked away in the heart of the earth. With every step he took toward the Fortress of the Void, an indescribable feeling overtook Cale. Something inside him seemed to have awakened, as if a flame he never knew existed was lighting up inside his chest. But at the same time, a chill ran down his spine, a feeling that he was no longer alone. The very earth seemed to pulse with something evil. The air, thick with darkness, made his breath heavy, as if he were inhaling the essence of pure evil itself. Beside him, his allies, Lorien and Damaris, were following with the same obvious tension. Lorien, with her firm archer stance, never wavered, but her eyes betrayed her anxiety. She knew Kael held an ancient power within, but what did that really mean? And Damaris, the wandering mage who had always relied on magic as his only ally, now looked at Kael with a mix of respect and fear. They both knew the line between hero and villain was razor thin, and Kael might be walking right on the edge of an abyss without even realizing it. Inside the Fortress of the Void, the presence of dark energy was growing stronger. Every step they took on the ancient moss-covered stones seemed to awaken something old, something that should never have been released. Kael knew that his own ancestors, the heirs of the Lost Shadows, had sealed away that evil, but now he was about to break the seal. The Order of the Void, obsessed with resurrecting the Ghost Emperors, knew Kael was the key, but he didn't fully grasp the true cost of it. When they reached the underground chambers of the fortress, Malachar appeared before them. The leader of the Order of the Void, a man with an imposing presence, cloaked in darkness, his eyes reflecting the emptiness itself. His voice echoed like a whisper of threat in the shadows. "You Kael the Last, the key to the restoration of the Emperors. They have returned to you. Now it's time to complete the cycle." He smiled, a disturbing grin that spread like a sinister fog. Malachar raised his hand, and with a nearly imperceptible motion, a portal of darkness opened before them. In the center of the portal, Kael saw a distorted reflection of his own face, but there was something wrong with it. It was as if he was looking at a being that didn't exist yet, a version of himself that would never have a chance to live. He knew that stepping through that portal would force him to make a choice, one that would change the fate of everyone. But what if he was just a pawn in Malachar's game? What was hiding behind that promise of power? In that moment, Kael felt the weight of his legacy. He didn't know if this was his destiny or if he was being manipulated. The ancient magic flowing through his veins wasn't just a gift, but a curse that connected him to forces beyond his understanding. The fear of becoming the monster his ancestors had imprisoned mixed with the need to protect those he loved. The decision Kael made now wouldn't just affect him. The entire world depended on him. But what would he choose? If he sided with the Order of the Void, he would unleash the Ghost Emperors, allowing darkness to consume the world. If he resisted, he would have to face the weight of his lineage, confront his own nature, and perhaps even destroy everything he believed in. With his gaze fixed on Malachar and his heart racing, Kael braced himself to make the choice that would define his destiny. He knew the real battle wouldn't be against the Ghost Emperors or the Order of the Void, but against the very ghosts inside him. The answer seemed to lie in his hands, but he still didn't know which path he would take. As the sound of the portal intensified, Kael, Lorien, and Damaris prepared to face whatever was to come. The shadows of the past were closer than ever. The line between salvation and damnation had never been so thin. But Kael's story was far from over. It was just beginning. Now more confused than ever, Kael felt the weight of Rygar's revelation. Everything he thought was a glorious destiny had turned into a deadly trap. The ancient power pulsing through his veins now felt like a death sentence. He looked at the black mask in his hands, the artifact he had once thought to be a symbol of his lineage, now revealed as a prison. A prison that trapped him while making him the key to a power he couldn't control. A legacy that should be destroyed but now ran through his blood, defying his humanity. Fear began to consume Kael, and doubt ate away at him. If the heirs of the Lost Shadows were created to imprison the Ghost Emperors, then he was nothing but a tool, a pawn in a game he would never understand. And the worst part? He might be the last heir, the final sacrifice needed to keep the Emperors sealed, but at the same time, the last link in the chain that could set them free. In his mind, questions intertwined and merged in an endless labyrinth. How could he fight what he didn't understand? How could he stop what was in his own blood? Lorien and Damaris were by his side, but he could feel the weight of responsibility on his shoulders, heavier than ever. They were his friends, but Kael knew the final decision was his. They couldn't choose for him, couldn't decide whether he would sacrifice himself or become the key to the destruction of everything that had been built. Rygar's words echoed in his mind. You can destroy the mask and free the Emperors, or become the seal, trapping them forever at the cost of your own existence. The pain in his chest intensified as the truth settled in. Cale realized there was no clear path, no easy way out. Whatever decision he made would bring irreversible consequences. And it was in that moment that Cale remembered something Rhaegar had said, something that resonated like a distant echo. The heirs of the Lost Shadows were not protectors of humanity. They were created for one single task: to keep the Ghost Emperors imprisoned, to ensure that the world did not fall into eternal emptiness. Cale felt the weight of what that meant. No matter what he chose, he was destined to carry this burden. But something inside him still resisted. A deep feeling, a flame that couldn't be extinguished. It was his humanity fighting against the legacy. The will to fight, to not be just a pawn in a game bigger than him. Cale looked at his allies, but once again the choice was in his hands. It was a choice between destroying what remained of his humanity or keeping the world alive at the cost of his own life. Was this what fate had in store for him? The darkness around him seemed to grow. The shadows were becoming thicker and more threatening. Cale knew that time was running out. The Order of the Void had no more patience. They would force him to make his choice, and soon. The weight of the mask in his hands felt more intense by the second, as if it were draining all the energy from his body. The decision was approaching, but Cale wasn't ready to choose. Not without understanding more about what it truly meant to be the last heir. Not without knowing what the true cost of the legacy was. He felt Lorien's presence beside him, her silent confidence. Damaris, with her calm wisdom, was also quiet, but Cale knew they were waiting for his decision. But the truth was, none of them could understand the depth of the dilemma he faced. They didn't carry the blood of the Lost Shadows. They didn't feel the weight of what was at stake. Only Cale knew what was to come, and that terrified him. The sky above began to darken, the wind howling with increasing intensity. The future of everyone hung by a thread, and Cale knew he would be the one to decide how that thread would be cut. But the big question remained: what would the price of his choice be? Was he willing to pay the cost of the legacy, or would he sacrifice himself for a future that could be even darker? And then he heard it. A distant voice, like a whisper coming from the depths of the earth. It was the echo of the Ghost Emperors calling him. Cale knew the answer was there in the shadows of his past, but he wasn't prepared for what he would discover. The war was about to reach its climax. The Order of the Void, led by Malachar, had gathered enough forces to weaken the seal on the Black Mask, and with it, the shadows began to swallow the world. The most distant cities started to be consumed, with streets overtaken by dark mist and dense creatures emerging from the darkness, their forms twisted and shapeless, as if feeding on the very light. Cale felt the ground tremble beneath his feet, knowing that the moment of his choice was drawing near. The war had spread so fast that it seemed there was no more hope. By the side of his allies, Lorien and Damaris, Cale prepared for the final confrontation with Malachar. The final battle not only determined the fate of humanity but also Cale's own fate. His eyes were fixed on the Black Mask, now completely shattered, with fragments sparkling like small stars around it. He felt an overwhelming pressure inside him, something he couldn't control, as if the shadows were calling him, as if his soul was the ultimate prize in this eternal conflict. The final battle seemed as inevitable as a storm. Malachar's power, now amplified by the darkness surrounding him, grew stronger by the second. He had transformed, in a way Cale never could have imagined, into something more, something monstrous, something immortal. Malachar was almost unrecognizable, with dried and aged skin, but his eyes, those red eyes full of rage and despair, were more alive than ever. He was ready to strike the final blow, the ultimate release of the Ghost Emperors, using Cale as the key to break the seal that had held those evil creatures captive for centuries. Cale then looked at his friends, at Lorien, with her fierce determination, and Damaris, with her magic glowing in the distance. They had come so far, faced so many challenges, and now, more than ever, he knew he couldn't let the world crumble. But at the same time, something inside him questioned, am I the real villain in this story? What he was about to do could mean his own destruction, his own downfall. But, at the same time, it could be the only way to save the world from eternal darkness. His body trembled, his blood boiling with the internal struggle, a silent battle against what he really was. What am I really? He thought. Lorien, beside him, noticed what was happening. She had always known Cale had more inside him than anyone could imagine, but now she feared for him. Cale, you know what to do, don't you? She looked at him with a mix of fear and trust. She didn't want him to be consumed by the darkness, but she knew the choice wasn't simple. She wanted to see him as the hero, but she knew that heroism sometimes demanded more than anyone could give. Damaris, always the voice of reason, gestured toward the broken mask, still releasing an intense aura, and said, "This is not your end. Don't lose yourself. You are not the key to destruction. You are the key for the change. And there's still something in you that no one else has." But her words sounded distant, almost like an echo, a truth Cale wasn't sure he could believe. And it was right there, at the height of the confrontation, when shadows and light mixed, that Cale made his choice. He wasn't just going to break the seal and let the Ghost Emperors come back. He wasn't going to let Malachar win. He needed to find something inside himself, a solution he didn't know existed until now. The fear, the anger, the desperation, it all seemed to fade away the moment he decided. He looked at the broken mask, at the darkness closing in, and as he did, something inside him started to vibrate. Cale felt an immense, unknown power breaking free from within him. Instead of simply destroying what was left of the mask, he connected to it, allowing the power that had trapped the Ghost Emperors to flow directly into him. But instead of being consumed by it, he absorbed it, mastered it, making it an extension of his own will. He wasn't becoming another victim. He wasn't becoming the next Ghost Emperor. He was becoming something new, something no one had ever imagined. The conflict, the internal struggle, and the choices were far from over, but Cale knew this was the only way to fight for the future. He wouldn't be controlled, he wouldn't be a puppet in the hands of the shadows. But in doing so, he knew something fundamental had changed. The war wouldn't be won the way everyone thought. Not with a simple battle of strength or by destroying the Ghost Emperors. The real victory would be an internal battle he'd have to fight until the very last moment. With a scream, Cale used the newly discovered energy inside him, unleashing a pure destructive force against Malachar. The impact was immediate. The darkness dissipated for a brief second, giving a fragile hope that the impossible could happen. But Cale knew victory wasn't guaranteed. He'd sacrificed himself not just for the battle but for his very soul. He wasn't sure if he'd be able to come back from the abyss he'd opened inside himself. As the power of the shadows receded, Cale and his friends stood in silence, waiting for the outcome. What would happen next? What remained of this war, of this journey full of sacrifices and choices, was still yet to be revealed. The future was in their hands, but the most painful question lingered in the air. Had Cale sacrificed himself, or had he transformed into something even more powerful than he ever imagined? The fate of the world, as well as his own fate, was still at play, and the final battle hadn't been won. The battle finally reached its peak. Cale, immersed in the darkness and shadows of his own destiny, made an impossible choice. He didn't just sacrifice himself, he transformed into something greater. Something that transcended the thin line between life and death, between darkness and light. The power of the Ghost Emperors was wiped out from within, but what he became after that is something beyond mortal understanding. The city was in ruins, but the war was over. The shadows that devoured the world had now been undone, and the forces that ruled over the hearts of men were banished. However, Cale, with all his sacrifice, didn't return. He was gone, but something else was happening. In the reflection of the broken mask, the glow of his eyes still resonated, leaving a doubt. Had Cale been lost forever, or had he become an entity of pure ancient magic? Lorien, with teary eyes, touched the mask, feeling the lightness that remained of it. She wondered if her friend was really gone, or if he had just started something new, something he couldn't or didn't want to understand. Damaris, with her mind racing, felt like something was still about to happen, a change that Cale had undoubtedly caused. Had he somehow been reborn, ready to challenge fate itself? The echoes of Cale's past and sacrifice vibrated, reverberating in every corner, in the minds of those who survived. The one who was considered the last hadn't really disappeared. Not as long as his legacy remained alive. The shadows that dominated human hearts were eradicated, but would Cale's rebirth come to save or destroy even more? Only time would tell. But what would you do in Cale's shoes? Could you make the choice he made even knowing the price? Would you sacrifice yourself, or would you look for another way? What do you think fate still has in store for those who face their own rebirth? If you liked this story, don't forget to leave a comment, drop a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more stories like this. I'll see you in the next video.